Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today to talk about the Valhalla Investment Summit in Saskatchewan, the first one ever. And this is put on, presented by Valhalla Angels and in partnership with Startup TNT. And we have Tim Lin with us. Tim, say hi.
Hey, how's it going?
And Zach actually as well here from TNT.
Hey, everybody.
Good. So let's get started. So really quickly, of course, I have to do the plug for Valhalla, but just for those who are not familiar with the organization, Valhalla Angels is a membership angel investor group. We are probably the largest angel network in Western Canada. We've been running since 2003. And we have 6 chapters, Calgary, Edmonton, Kelowna, Vancouver, Regina, and Saskatchewan. And we also have a remote membership for those who are in other areas. We have about 120 investors in our network. To date, we have made about 269 deals that's in our portfolio and invested about 71 million into early stage companies. We do have different services within our organization. So we have the angel investors, one part of it, but we also run some debt and equity funds. We also have our training and education, which goes through our Global Accelerator program. So if you've heard about the Founders Basecamp or Angel 101 Basecamp, those are run through Valhalla. And then also we have our global reach. So we do run this training in other countries. We have a fund in Latin America, Southeast Asia. And the last piece of our services would be the M&A services. So they help companies get ready for exits. Okay, this is not working. Okay, there we go. Tim, I'll let you tell people what TNT is all about.
I didn't know that Zach was going to be here, and he tells the story way better than I do. So Zach, do you want to take the TNT stuff here, and I'll deal with how this is all going to work a bit later?
Sure. Yeah, I just came here to support because I love to see that we're partnering with Valhalla. Just so everybody knows, I've been a member of Valhalla Angels since like 2014. So I'm really happy to be formally partnering with them as they expand in Saskatchewan. And I love investing in great entrepreneurs and great startups. And I know there's a lot in Saskatchewan. So here's the short story. I also like drinking beer with friends. And so I do it every single Thursday. TNT stands for Thursday Night Tradition. Our philosophy is have fun, make friends, build companies. So the core thing that we do, that we started doing, is meeting at a local brew pub here in Edmonton, Alberta. Scientists, entrepreneurs, investors getting together, having fun, making friends, making deals, ideally, right? And you don't necessarily make deals just at a happy hour. And so when we started this, and me being an angel investor, I was at this conference where there was this great idea I'd heard about that they've done in other cities called an angel summit or an investment summit, where you get a bunch of people together, they put money into a hat, you train them about angel investing. And so we did our very first summit almost a year ago now. We invested in 3 great companies. We did another one in the fall, and I'm really excited to see what happens with Valhalla in Saskatchewan. So hand it back to you, Tim. That's us.
Cool. Yeah, that's TNT. What's on the next slide, Evelyn?
Yeah. Next night. So just to tell you a little bit about Valhalla and Startup TNT partnership, basically because Zach mentioned he's been part of Valhalla for a long time, and obviously we have very similar missions that we want to give people the tools and the opportunity to be part of the support to the startup ecosystems and start investing and start building businesses right here in Western Canada. So basically we're trying to help entrepreneurs and investors in their journey. And so one of the ways we decided that Valhalla and Startup TNT were such a good synergy, or we had such good synergy, was because we wanted to start, like catalyzing this investment into early stage companies in ecosystems that are not necessarily like super big yet, right? So one of the ways that we decided we would do that is through the investment summit. And so because we just launched our chapters in Regina and Saskatchewan, we decided that this would be the perfect first summit that we could host to kick off those chapters as well. So yeah, so this is a little bit about the investment summit and all the stats that we're going to be talking about today, and some of these results and the impact that the TNT summit has had in other locations is coming from the ones that they've run in Alberta. And that we're hoping that, like our results in Saskatchewan are going to add to that. So basically the summit is we recruit about 20 to 30 investors. Some of the investors are new, some of them might have had already some investments done. And then they all put in $5,000, and Tim is going to get into the details later on what the investor side looks like, excuse me. And then basically with those 20 to 30 investors, we put together about $100,000, depending on how many investors we have, obviously. And that becomes the prize for the first place company, or the one that gets selected to receive that investment. Usually, or I guess we are trying to recruit about 30 or so companies to go through this process. Once we get our final amount of applications, we screen them down to 20 companies. Those companies would pitch, and then we select 5 finalists later on the process. And so those 5 companies we go into a more in-depth due diligence with them. And then at the day of the summit, the investors actually deliberate, and then they discuss and they decide who's gonna get the investment. So this is not just like a pitch competition. This is a process for it's a deal screening process. It's a real world investment. It's not just based on the pitching, but you actually have to have an investable company, right? For you to go through this process. Other things that we are trying to accomplish with the summit is to build community, right? Bringing together the entrepreneurs and the investors. And we do have a social part to the program. So every Thursday night, we will be having some bevies and some chats after our investor meetings, and the entrepreneurs are always welcome to join those. Other part is that we do have an investment made at the end of this. However, the startups get additional support on top of that, right? Is through interacting with investors and getting that feedback, I think is very important. And then eventually that might work out into a more to a different relationship, maybe mentorship, some advising, some building your networks, right? So there's more than the raising the money part for the companies, but also there's the raising money part of it. And then, of course, increasing your knowledge about what it is like to talk to investors and going through this deal screening process, and then actually receiving the investment, because that's a big part of it, right? Because you can pitch as much as you want, but you need to understand how you're going to receive investment from the investors as well. Yeah, so we're hoping that this summit is gonna give us some really good investments in some startup companies from Saskatchewan. And then, yeah, so as I mentioned, who should apply? So companies that are trying to grow, right? They're not just a small business, but they're also they also are trying to grow their companies and scale them. That they're actually raising money, or usually their first bigger round, right? Like not so much the friends and family, but that they're trying to raise the money to scale their operations, that they already have a product. And then usually per revenue and revenue is okay. However, something that's very important for us is that you are coachable, right? You're going to go through the process. You're going to talk to a lot of people. And so we need everybody to be, open to the feedback that they're going to receive to the process. You are going to have to commit some time during your weeks. This is about an 8-week process. Usually it takes about 2 to 3 hours per week for you to, like whatever you need to get ready on paperwork, have your pitch and corporate documents ready. We do have 2 pitch nights, and also the top 5 or top 10 in particular, they'll be doing some one-on-one meetings with the investors. So being available to go to those coffee meetings is important as well. And then, hold on. And then on the investor side, obviously we're looking for investors that they have a vested interest in growing the local innovation ecosystems and the startup community. Again, they also have to come in to participate in the 8-week program. Investors usually meet about once a week, and it's mostly to discuss the whole deal screening process and voting and all that stuff. And then they obviously have to come in with their minimum investment, which is $5,000, and then $500 towards the corporate maintenance costs. And then, of course, they have to be accredited investors. If there's anybody in this room that is not an accredited investor or they don't know if they qualified as accredited investor, let us know and then we can chat about it. But also, if you Google it, it's very easy. We also have something on the Startup TNT website that can tell you about it. Basically, it's based on income and financial assets. Maybe we can share a link later on the chat here.
I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Okay. And actually, I'm going to pass this to Tim because he was, or Zach, whoever wants to pitch in, because this is the results from their first summit. So people can know a little bit more of, like what came out of like hosting the first investment summit in Edmonton.
Yeah. So the first summit that we did, this was, we'll call it January, February of 2020. From Zach's original, let's have beers on Thursdays and then let's start up this summit thing. This was our first attempt at doing this, figuring it out on the fly. Had 25 awesome investors, 8 of whom were pretty seasoned and had done a bunch of deals, and 17 of them being brand new to the angel world, which is a lot of fun. It's a blast seeing people that don't even know what a startup is, and then at the end of it being able to use terms like anti-dilution rights and fun, interesting things that they've learned through the process. The company that won, 25 investors times 5,000 each is of course 125,000. So you'll see on the bottom left, Drug Bank was the company that won through the process, was the most investable company through that process. But the 25 investors, it's not a unanimous decision by any means. And so 2S Water and Future Fields both came through the process in a very tight photo finish. And investors like, well, I like Drug Bank, but I also want to invest in 2S Water. That one seems pretty good. Like I put in all this time, built these relationships with these people, like they seem super cool. And so they put another $5,000 into that one, and same thing with Future Fields. And so all that to say, this process is not a simple single prize at the end. First of all, it's an investment, and second of all, it's a function of building relationships with a pile of investors that could very well invest in your company, whether it be right at the very end or even in the future if your company isn't quite at the mark of being investable today. If you can go to the next slide, Evelyn. I'm assuming that this is an impact of Summit 2.
Yep.
Which was just finishing, well, it's actually just finishing up right now. I'm in the middle of collecting all the checks from all the investors and all this sort of stuff. But November 19th was the summit here. Again, another like 2-month process. We had 83 companies apply. We did this one in Edmonton and Calgary. So 2 essentially separate summits, but run in parallel. So 40-ish in Edmonton, 40-ish in Calgary. a top 20 in Edmonton and Calgary, which means that 40 of those companies gained experience pitching. And then this is just some of the, typical demographics for where the startups are landing. It's kind of in the, 2 to 8 million valuation range. They're looking for 250K to 2 million on the round. Some of them are really early product market fit or like MVP, early scaling. And that's kind of the general sense of where those top 20 are landing. And the way that we kind of look at it is if it's an idea, if you're one person, you're like, oh, I really want to build this thing. This would be super cool. I came up with this idea last week. Like I touched too early. If you think that, 100 grand or 150 grand is like not really worth like an 8-week process, too late. And so it's kind of this happy medium of Goldilocks that we play with for which companies are the appropriate time for the summit. And then of course, a whole bunch of people showed up and it was a blast. The next one I think should be who raised money and how this is going. So Aeralytics was the company that won in Calgary. True Angle was the company that won in Edmonton. All these numbers are actually higher now than when we put this slide together because more investors keep on saying that they want in. Aeralytics, I think, is probably going to end up being about 350, 400,000. True Angle is probably just over 200,000. Arbor's at 125 so far. Neurora is actually right at that mark, and Uproot is probably going to be just a touch more than that. But all that to say, again, similar concept, some new investors, some old investors, and a wide range of investors that participated. And of course, Evelyn mentioned in the chat, let us know if you have any questions. So feel free to jump in. If you have questions, chuck them in the chat, or you can also unmute, ask the question, and I'll be able to answer it live. What do we have next, Evelyn?
Next is the team.
Oh.
So I'll start and then I'll pass it back to you, I guess.
Sure.
So I'm Evelyn Thursda. Some of you might know me already. I'm the president for the Regina and Saskatchewan chapters for the Valhalla Angels. And I'm the former executive director from the Saskatchewan Capital Network. I've been involved in the Saskatchewan startup ecosystem probably since 2012 or so. But yeah, so that's me. And Tim, can you want to intro your team?
Yeah, so I'm the co-organizer of Startup TNT alongside Zach, who spoke a little bit earlier. The other part of my life that I do is I'm a fractional CFO, so I do work with a bunch of startups, including some of the ones from Collabs. I'm an investor. I also used to help manage deals through mostly with companies that are looking to sell. And I was a part of a startup that exited in the health tech space, which is a fun story, but I can get into that at another time. Zach is awesome. Zach, do you want to introduce yourself because you're here?
Sure. I kind of introduced myself at the beginning, but before I ran Startup TNT, I did a PhD at McGill. I moved out to Edmonton, worked as a postdoc, and wanted to build great companies. And so that's what I work on. Yeah.
And then the other two are also finance guys that are helping run Startup TNT. And together, we're all going to put this investment summit on together and have a time. Find a bunch of investors, find a bunch of companies, and smash them together and see what happens. It's a bunch of fun.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about the actual process. So I think Tim, you probably have a better handle on this one. So I'll let you talk about the details of the application process, the requirements, the dates, and all that stuff.
Yeah. So the process is it'll be a late January through mid-March process. A whole bunch of companies will apply. The number that's there is 40, but who knows what the actual number is? It could be 1,000. I don't know how many startups there are in Saskatchewan. Hopefully not that many, because that would be a bit of a process. I think the investors should be upset. Then they'll screen it down to a top 20, and we'll go through the mechanics of how exactly that works. Those 20 companies will pitch and have like maybe a coffee meeting, like a 30 to 60 minute coffee meeting with a small investor group. Then from that, it'll be whittled down to a top 10. There will be like a basic level of due diligence that'll be done, maybe another follow-up conversation, some questions, some light stuff to figure out who the top 5 companies are. those top 5 companies will have sort of a data room review, a negotiation of the term sheets in the USA, like a proper, all right, we're looking at this as a potential investment. And then of that, those 5 companies go to the investment summit, which is, you know, this day of fun. And that's the day where that, you know, to the previous examples of Drug Bank, Aeralytics and True Angle being selected, that's the days when those happen. But that's also, you know, that final 5, those are the ones that the investors think are truly investable. And in an ideal world, all 5 of them get funded. But of course, when you look a little bit farther behind the hood, that's when you really, you know, that's when the rubber hits the road, and whatever other idioms we want to use to see which ones are actually ones that we can invest in. So yeah, next. So yeah, so like I said, companies will apply now through to the end of January. I think the application deadline will be January 26th. We're also looking for investors to join and form the syndicate and, you know, put in their funds and do all that sort of stuff. In January, we're going to have education sessions in mid-Jan. So I think the middle couple weeks of January there. And we're going to be looking at the applications. So on the 26th, that'll be when you have your pitches and all this stuff will be submitted as a startup. The investors will then review that over the course of the following week to see, you know, do like a once over and grade it essentially. Then that's where the top 20 comes from. So in this third column of screenings, this is, you know, the pitch nights and coffee meetings and the kind of that process that I was describing. And then of course, the final bit at the summit, where the investors choose who the most investable company is, but, you know, immediately prior to that, needing to negotiate the deal structure and look at all the documents and do all that sort of stuff. Next. Now, the question that people typically ask is, holy crap, 25, 30 investors, like this is going to be a disaster on my cap table. I don't want to manage this. We got you. What we do is we set up a holdco and syndicate the investors through a single purpose entity. And the way that this works mechanically is that the investors are investing equity into this holdco. 5,500, the 5,000 of that 5,500 gets invested into the startup. 500 of that is held as cash in the company to maintain it so that it stays alive. So you have to pay for annual tax filings and minute book and all of that really great, fun administrative stuff in order to keep the company alive. But what happens is that 5,000 times however many investors is invested into the startup, nothing really happens until the investment is liquidated, and then all the cash comes all the way back up and distributes out to the investors. So as an investor, the question is, you know, is this efficient? This is probably the most efficient way to go about making sure that the cap table on a startup side is clean. And for a startup, it's the most effective way to syndicate out a whole pile of investors and get a whole bunch of smaller checks without having to blow up your cap table and manage a whole bunch of investors. And again, jump in if you have any questions. The voting. So how does this work? So like I described earlier, a whole bunch of companies are going to apply. And then of that, we need to have a top 20. So the way that it works is the investors choose the, you know, at least 10 of the companies. We typically tell them to just go in alphabetical order in order to get a decently wide distribution of the selection. They score the companies on a scale of 1 to 4. So 1 being a hard no, 4 being a hard yes. And then from that, we essentially do like a skimming of the points. So the top, you know, the top average scores get carried through the top 20 average scores. Similar concept for the top 10 and the top 5, except what we do is the investors essentially ordinally rank the company. So instead of just a 1 to 4 point system, we get them to ordinally rank their top 10. And what that means is, you know, if they give somebody a number 1, they get 10 points, number 2 gets 9 points, etc. And then from that, you know, the top 10 companies will come through, and subsequently to that, the top 5 will come through. And then finally, what happens is where that 100 or maybe hopefully more goes is a similar concept to that, except, you know, there's only 5 companies left. So it's number 1 gets 5 points, number 2 gets 4 points, etc. And then there you go. You get a great distribution, and the company with the most points gets the investment, which sounds kind of crude, but that's the way that it works. And it seems thoroughly efficient so far. It's a bunch of fun.
Sounds fair.
Can I comment on this? Because this is kind of awkward. I mean, not awkward, but maybe a little odd to people. And I just want to comment that there's actually like sort of an interesting investment thesis here, which is getting 25 intelligent people together to all share this work. Collectively, they're going to make a better investment decision than any of us would make as an individual. So that's, or they're going to make as good as an investment decision as the most sophisticated investor you can find. That's kind of the thesis. So. That's part of it. Everyone making their own individual decision on what we should invest in. It's a big part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, there's been a few studies that have happened to this effect where if you sample a group of people, you actually end up with a better, you end up with a better forecast or a better prediction than if you asked one expert. And in order to maintain that sort of group independent thinking, we blind all of the results. So the first time that we did this in Investment Summit 1, we didn't do this. And the top 5 was exactly the same the whole way through. The second time that we did it, we blinded the results all the way through. So the top 20, we didn't say who company number 1 or company number 20 was. We just said this is the top 20. And what was interesting was that it allowed for a lot more movement and a lot more thinking about the top 20 instead of everybody just herding up to the top 5 and looking at those ones because those are the best ones. Let's just look at those. We forced everybody to look at the full top 20 and really show that, all of them are worth looking at and everything like that. So yeah, just to add on to Zach's point, that's kind of the way that we run it. Evelyn, what's next?
Next, the education. So actually, some of the people in the room today, they already went through some of these. We just hosted a Founders Basecamp in Saskatchewan at the end of November. So this is actually an optional for entrepreneurs, but also we encourage it. For those who already participated in one, they don't need to go through it again. But this is available for those who want to learn more about the process of raising money and what's the best instrument that they can use, how to pitch, all that stuff. The Founders Basecamp that we are hosting, the dates are still to be confirmed. We do have one open on the 23rd and 24th of January, but we might open up one specifically to Saskatchewan again. But we're gonna let you know if you register with us and you're looking into applying, just let us know and we'll keep you in the loop for the Founders Basecamp. But basically this training is delivered by Valhalla, and what you're gonna learn is to look at your company from the investor's perspective, right? And so what type of founder you are, but also what type of investor you would be by looking at your company in, from a different perspective. And then we take you through, like some of the specifics of the, what's a convertible note or a safe and all those things. What we want to accomplish here is to prepare you to talk to investors and make sure that you are able to communicate your company as a good investment opportunity. Not so much about how great your product is, but why you're such a good investment opportunity for them, right? You do get a pitch practice round, but yeah, the whole point on this training is for you to get better at selling your company as an investment, not selling your product. And yeah, so the next one, yeah.
And the important part about the entrepreneur education, a couple things. So one, the first impression that when you submit, it's largely your pitch deck that's the important part in the submission. When you submit that, it's essentially your first impression to a group of 2-ish dozen people. What we've done in the past is we've had this education come after that initial submission, and if anybody knows, first impressions are pretty key. And what ends up happening is if you have the application and then you have the education, and then everybody's like, oh crap, I would have like changed this so much. I like would have done this so much better. And then they're out of the top 5. We're having the education come first so that you're able to put your best foot forward for the investors and really make sure that things are a bit of a tight ship before sending that in.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, we also run a program for educating the investors, especially those who have never, or this is their first time or second time investing as an angel, and they're still getting comfortable with, calling themselves investors. This program actually goes through, like what are the basic terms, concepts, the lingo, all those things. Where do angels usually play within the funding ecosystem? How do you get exits? How do you get your money back? Learning how to sort of like build your investment thesis and what type of investor you're going to be and what's your investment style. This program is also going to be running in January, and it's going to be running from the 11th and the 18th. And then I think we might open up a couple more like before our investor meetings, depending on the group. And then also part of the education for the investors is going through those weekly meetings and discussing the actual companies, right? So that's where a lot of the investors get the most out of it, to be honest. Anything else you want to add, Tim?
No, I mean the Angel 101 is a super helpful thing. Yeah, it's fun. Both for people who have done it before and for people who haven't, especially for people who haven't.
We just did one in Saskatchewan as well, and I got really good feedback from the people who attended. So they said it was really helpful, actually. So this is a great like warm up towards actually investing and looking at the companies, right? So, okay, key dates. Tim?
Sure. So I guess applications are live now on the website. So if you're an investor, you can indicate your interest, and that would kick off sort of a series of processes that would mean that we would talk to you and see what you're up to and make sure that you're interested and make sure you know what you're signing up for and that you're actually accredited. And then you'd fill out a bit of paperwork and send in your money. On the startup side, the applications are live and they close on January 26th. So what's important is that the applications are open. You can put in your information and get that process started. You can modify that application all the way through until January 26th. So don't hesitate to get your name in and just make sure that you're in there. And then we can make sure that we'll email and follow up and make sure that things are you're sending in your final deck and making sure that everything's all good. But don't hesitate to sign up sooner rather than later, mostly because it'll help us not feel like we're screwing everything up. So feel free to sign up sooner, please.
Thank you.
But yeah, the 26th is really when, so there's education in mid-January. January 26th is when applications close. And then of course, the 28th is when we're gonna start showing everything to investors, making sure that we have everything all going. And they'll start reviewing the companies and doing all that sort of stuff. The top 20 will be selected on the 2nd. And then right away is a couple pitch nights. So for those top 20, 10 of them will be pitching on February 4th, 10 of them on the 11th to the investors who are trying to figure out what's going on and selecting those companies. Those investors will also be doing some meetings, those coffee meetings that I was discussing earlier with companies for those, I guess that's 2-ish weeks. On the 18th, the top 10 will be selected through that voting process described earlier. The investors will then focus in on those top 10 because investors will have questions. They'll be like, oh, I really like this one. I really want to know more about this before I can decide that they're the top 5. And so that's sort of where the investors will start to hone things in over that week. The 25th, the top 5 will be selected. And then for the following, I guess that's 4 weeks, investors will be figuring out deal terms and looking at the data rooms and doing all that sort of stuff, like the proper stuff that you'd see in typical diligence. And then on the 18th, that's the investment summit, and that's when the investments are announced. And then, of course, the final bit is funding, and that typically happens over the course of the month subsequent. While we, for the company that wins, the money's already in an account. But for side deals and for people who are like, well, $5 grand is great, but I want to put in another 10 grand, we have to collect all the checks and do all that sort of stuff and cross the T's and dot the I's, and that happens over the course of the following month. So that's why we're still settling things up for the summit that happened on November 19th.
Yeah. And then on March, just FYI, the pitch nights are open to the public. They are going to be virtual, but we are going to be streaming them for the public to watch. And so it's also a good opportunity for, like a good platform for spread the word about your companies. And also the investment summit on March 18th, that's actually a half-day like program with speakers, panels, and the announcement is the closure of the summit, and that's also going to be open to the public. So you guys did great in Alberta. Like, how many people do you have on that at the summit? Like,
I don't know, like a few hundred.
Yeah, so that one is open for everybody to like tune in. And then these are to be confirmed, but we might have some additional events. Maybe a reverse pitch night with service providers, one with VCs. We did one in Alberta. It was pretty fun, actually, where the VCs actually have to pitch to the entrepreneurs instead of the other way around. And you get to put them on the spot this time. And then they did an alumni pitch. So these are just tentative. We're still confirming. We're going to release the full final schedule probably in January once we have a better idea. But yeah, I think that's, oh yeah, you still have more slides, Tim, to go through. I'll let you go through, and then we might want to leave some time for Q&A for people.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, people can, please ask questions as we go through. There's just a few high level slides as we kind of finish this off here. So feel free to please ask questions. So what does due diligence mean? What does it kind of look like? I've kind of described it a little bit, but mostly up front for the top 20, it's more things like a quick coffee, virtual coffee meeting, conference call type dealio. But then as you get to the top 5, it's more intense stuff, such as actually looking at documents and actually looking at, in a perfect world, to be coming and looking at, if it's like a physical product, looking at the lab or whatever, looking at the IP, chatting with some folks and understanding whether you actually have stuff, or if it's all made up. That's essentially, you don't want to write a check to something that doesn't exist, so that's less than perfect. So it's a bit more intense than just a quick chat. But the whole point is that you need to, as an investor, you need the trust that the startup is going to be able to go and work and execute and build on something. And it's a function of, a lot of it is actually about, and this was one of the startups that raised money. What they did really well at exemplifying was that they were able to build that credibility through progressing over those 8 weeks. So they gave a snapshot, one on the first pitch night, or the first submission, and then the progress that they made over the course of that kind of 6 weeks from pitch 1 to the summit. The investors were like, holy crap, they did that in 6 weeks. Just imagine if we give them 6 months or 6 years, they're going to completely smash it. And they just wrote checks. So that's a part of it. And then of course, building relationships. Another startup that came through, she made it a very intentional point that she was going to reach out to every single one of the investors and meet with every single one of them. It went a long way. You wouldn't necessarily think it does, and that you think that it's all for naught, but not only do you get to meet with all of them and build relationships and get your name up there and all that sort of stuff, it also, if they're like, oh damn, this person hustles, I guess, I don't know, she's, all else being equal, you need tenacity and grit in order to make this thing work. So that's kind of the whole point of due diligence. It's trust, credibility, and building relationships. And of course, do we want to go in on it together?
Hey, Tim, this might be a silly question, but in the previous slide you had, can you go back one, please?
Yep. Hold on.
The data room.
Mhm.
Can you just elaborate on that? I must have missed it. You went over it.
Yeah, so a data room is essentially just a Dropbox or a Google Drive folder of things such as, your corporate records, your cap table, your pitch deck, your IP, like your patents and whatever, and whatever other sort of like tangible documents there are that somebody would need in order to, see your company and be able to invest in it. It's just called a data room. But it's, a folder of, we'll call it between 5 and 20 documents that constitute the company that an investor would want to see when they're doing diligence. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, great, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, we're in the process of putting up some educational materials on the Startup TNT website for what a good data room looks like or what things to include in that. And then of course, that's also part of the Basecamp training that Evelyn was talking about earlier, is to make sure that you have that together, because that's typically the process is reach out to an investor, give them a teaser, or send them the deck. Second step is, have a meeting with them, walk them through the deck, questions back and forth. Great, I'm interested. And then you open up the data room. So that's the process. So it's having that all together is pretty key for the process.
Great, thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, basically what we need this is that, when it's to make sure that you are ready to go when the investors want to look at your further documents and stuff. So that's why we need you guys to be ready with your data room and all that stuff. But if you Google it, there's also lots of information, and we will be sharing some as well. Okay. 5 minutes, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah, Melanie, what's up?
Hi there. I was just wondering about, are there any themes that investors in this network are interested in specifically going forward? Is it on the previous slides, there was some mention of clean tech, and I'm just wondering if there's, or are people pretty much agnostic?
So the mentions of clean tech are because we're running a clean tech summit in Alberta at the same time.
Yeah, that's,
and we ripped the slides and missed changing that out. So as long as they're Saskatchewan companies, Saskatchewan startups that have scalable potential, that's the target. That's the target company. So not a corner store, like, classic, it needs to be a startup type stuff. But besides that, no, not yet. So companies that have won so far companies that have had deals so far in Alberta, call it a pharmaceutical SaaS company, that's Drug Bank, a cultured meat company, so a company that's going to be growing fake meat, or not fake meat, it's real meat grown in a petri dish, so like cow meat, but not grown on a cow. 2S Water, which is analyzing water in industrial processes. Nuora, which is a SaaS company for oil, or SaaS business for oil companies. True Angle, which is a medical device. It's a whole wide range of companies that are in there. So scalable companies that have a potential is the game plan.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Matthew Hunter asked, there was a note earlier about intention of startups to expand globally. Can you elaborate on that? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking, but if I was to read that, yeah.
Sorry, Tim. It's just because it says something about startups with global aspirations. It's just a growing mentality, right? Again, if nothing wrong with staying as a small business, but we're looking for someone that's looking to scale and expand their startups.
Yeah. The alternative is what's called a lifestyle business, which it sounds like a pejorative term, but it's really not. There's awesome lifestyle businesses where people pull in $50, $100 million a year. But it isn't what investors are looking for at this stage in the game. Those types of companies are ones that you can like bootstrap and get off the ground and, command Western Canada by way of example. That's awesome. But the, startups that are hunting for to be, the next Shopify or the next Uber. That's the game plan. How do deal negotiation work? So typically what happens is startup puts forward their, what they want the deal to look like. And then, there's a bit of negotiation between the startup and the investor team. Realistically, what happens is all the way before the top 5, there isn't really a lot of negotiation. It's the startup puts forward what they would like to see. And then the investors are essentially doing a take it or leave it approach. And it could be the company's too expensive and they have wild expectations and this isn't going to work. Therefore, not top 5. They can potentially find some other investors. And that feedback would be provided, if you ask your investors, the feedback would be provided prior to that date. And then once you get into the top 5, it's more of a negotiation, making sure that the term sheet is in place appropriately and that the shareholders agreements are in place appropriately and all that sort of stuff, as well as some negotiation with a lead investor that represents the group for your company, if that makes sense. I don't know who asked that. Does that kind of answer the question? Cool, sounds good. And then Lyndon asked, what size of equity stakes are investors looking for? Typically, so to use the previous examples around size and the amount that's raised, typically what ends up happening is, just as a rule of thumb, what you typically want to be raising is for 20 to 25% dilution on a given round. So let's say you want to raise $1 million, you typically be raising it, call it a $4 or a $5 million valuation. Much higher than that in terms of valuation. And the question is, is this too small of a round or is your expectations out of whack? And too small, like smaller than that, like if you're raising $1 million on, $1 or $2 million, you're giving up too much of the company and like maybe you shouldn't be raising this much and whatever. So that's kind of the rule of thumb around how much of an equity stake investors are looking for. But in terms of if the question is how much do I need to give up in order to get $100,000? The answer is it very much depends on where you are as a company. Again, this is a deal screening process. So a company that's earlier, that's maybe worth say $2 million, could win over a company that's a little bit later and they say that they're worth 10 because maybe the deal is more attractive for the smaller company that's a little bit earlier and the investors want to work with that one as opposed to the later stage one. So to answer, it's not a simple percent question. It's, we'll take as much of the round as you're willing to give. And if you have more questions.
And also somebody asked about the stage of the company, right? So if someone that's already more advanced than just like starting, it's better, have a better chance to be selected during the process. And I would say, obviously, yes, right? Because an investor would like to see at least that you have some, have run some piloting, you're doing some, have done some testing with your product or service, right? So you're trying to prove to the investors that you have something that's investable and that, like it can grow. So for that, you would need to have already at least an MVP or, have some pilots or at least some testing. You don't need to have revenue yet. You can be pre-revenue, but just something that can prove to us that you have something that people want or that you're on good track to like finding your product market fit. That's a good way to put it, like not earlier than that. Like if you have just a business idea, that's not enough to go through the process.
Mm-hmm. And to Matthew's point, should an applicant be incorporated already? The answer is an absolute yes. And if a board of directors is in place, does that influence investment decisions? It probably positively influences investment decisions. It just shows that you kind of have your stuff together. But I don't have, without more context, it's hard for me to answer that. It's a very nuanced question, but yeah.
If you have somebody super awesome on your board, of course, that's a plus, right? But yeah,
it's a super positive signal. Yeah, if you have somebody that's legit, like a great brand, it's like, oh damn, this person this person is like willing to be on their board and like put in the time and everything. Like they really believe in that. Like, oh, they know more about me than that in that industry. Like, yeah, I should definitely go in on this. That's awesome.
Yeah. And but definitely incorporated. People need to be incorporated. Yeah. Also something that I wanted to mention, if you are eligible, please apply for the Saskatchewan tax credit, investment tax credit. So because the investors will be looking into that as well. It doesn't have to be, but if you are eligible, make sure that you apply and you have your certificate for to be ready for the time the investment happens. Tammy, it's free. The investment summit is free, so there's no cost for companies to participate. Right, Tim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's like a.
Yeah, absolutely, it's free. No, I mean it's great. We want as many companies to apply as possible, and of course as much investment to happen as possible. And that's, you know, we don't want cost to be a function of how to participate. So open to all and free to participate for sure.
Yeah. How much weight do investors place on a startup that has participated in a reputable accelerator program, if at all?
Yeah, definitely some. You know, some folks that came through the most recent investment summit had gone through. Actually, a lot of the winners that have come through have gone through CDL Rockies. You know, again, much like the board question, it's a positive signal. You want as many positive signals as you can going into this. Having a super awesome, fully stacked data room is an awesome signal. Having a really polished pitch deck and an awesome pitch, great signal. Having customers and revenue, great signal. It's just a function of combining all these signals in order to convince investors to have the trust to drop cash on your company. And that's the game of trying to get investment.
Yep. I think we need to wrap it up, Tim, unless someone has one more very quick question. We can take one last one, but if not, I think we can wrap it up. And I posted the website right at the beginning, but I'll repost it again for those that came in a bit late. We've been recording this session, and so we're going to be sharing the link as well. If you want to rewatch it or you want to share it with someone else, you can do that as well. If you go into this website or you look for startuptnt.com, is that
Yep.
it? Yeah. You can also find more information there as well. At the Valhalla Angels page, you can actually submit your name and your email so we can send you an application form. And then same with the investors, you can express your interest in participating through our, there's an apply to invest button there somewhere. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. But yeah, so that's it from us. We're very excited to host this in Saskatchewan. I think, why the name Valhalla? That's a longer story, Matthew, but happy to tell it to you over Thursday night tradition drinks, hopefully. But yeah, so yeah, we're very excited to host this in Saskatchewan. I think it'll be great. Please share with everybody that you know that might be interested. Send them our way as well. Very important, right? Like this is led by the investors and the startup community, right? And so your involvement, even if it's to support your peers and other founders by attending the other events, like everything, what the big thing with Startup TNT and Valhalla Investment Summit is to bring that community together while supporting someone that's actually scaling their business, right? So yeah.
Yeah, the other half of that is, you know, if you've already got an investment or if you know investors that you're chatting with and that side of things, it's awesome to have them go through this even for your own selfish reasons, because their level of confidence of being able to invest And if they have fun with it, they'll bring in their friends, and people that have cash typically know people that also have cash. It's great. It's a great education process, and that level of confidence increases the amount that they're willing to invest in the ecosystem and ultimately in you. So it's an awesome community. It's a great way to build this all up together. So feel free, invite fellow startups, invite fellow investors, invite your investors, invite your startups. It's all a great way to make this happen.
Yes. Awesome. Well, with that, yeah, we're gonna leave it there. Thank you so much for attending today, and yeah, just don't hesitate in contacting us if you have any other additional questions.
Yeah, this will be a bunch of fun. Thanks, Evelyn. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.